I greet you again in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. A pleasure to come back. And for myself and all that I represent, we would like to extend congratulations to God's special miracle ministry, 3ABN. Amen. And I see that you love it as much as I do. It's a privilege to be here with my wife again and to worship with you, and to see you, to fellowship, to share hope, the promises of God. The title of my simple message is The Last Mile Home. Last year, I remember giving you an allegory. This year, I offer an analogy and ask you to follow and see where we will go. When I was 14 or 15 years of age, I can remember very well being proud to tell folk I was a country boy. Oh, I love that life. But we were picked up each morning of the week and carried off to city schools. And so as I began to reach those years when socializing became important to one, I wanted to stay in town as long as possible at friends' homes or wherever else we went. But there was one thing I had to keep in mind, and that was the last bus that went in the direction of my house left the town square at 11 p.m. Now, I couldn't wish that away or change it. If I were going to get home on time, I had better keep that in mind and be there. Usually at that hour, the crowd had dwindled and the bus was never crowded. But right on 11 on the clock, the driver would head up North Elm Street to Battleground Avenue. That's a strange name, I guess, to some, Battleground Avenue. In the area where I lived, General Nathaniel Greene had defeated Lord Cornwallis in the Revolutionary War. That's how my town got to be called Greensboro. I remember it with a great deal of affection, of course. About a half hour after we had taken off, I might be the only passenger on that bus, and yet the driver had to go all the way out. But make no mistake about it, the driver did not take me home. He took me to a nice community called Kirkwood, and where he made a left turn, I disembarked and began the last mile and a half to where I lived. As a matter of fact, there were only 3 or 4 blocks of lighted houses, and then darkness that sometimes seemed palpable. The last mile and a half home. And there I was, 15 at most. I graduated at 16. And I've got this lonely, dark, dangerous road all to myself. Very seldom at that hour would you even see a car on the road. Those who wanted to be somewhere were there. And here I go. I want to tell you something, however. I would come to a spot in the road more than once, and there would come a moment of decision. If I would take the footpath through 2 forests, if I would dare face the unknown in the blackness of night, along that footpath, I could cut off a half mile. So it became the last mile home. As I stood there all by myself contemplating what I should do, I would always remember there was a pitiful little shack where the grass was never cut and you never saw the lights on. I would come by there in the daylight. It still gave you chills and caused your pulse to quicken. But at night, it was terrifying. So I stood there wondering, what should my decision be? I had been told clearly over and over and over again that the little white-haired lady that lived in that pitiful shack was a bona fide witch. The last mile home involves spiritualism, if you catch my meaning. So I pondered what I should do. And then I would look at that longer road. It wasn't much better. The forests came right up to the edge of it. No cars. Generally, I would decide to go through the forests by myself at night. And even when I would do that, I would bolster my courage with the macho notion that real men are not afraid of anything. I was tough. I'm ready. At least that's what I would tell myself. Once I had moved past that little shack, there was an irregular path that went almost straight downhill. And it wasn't easy to negotiate, especially when you couldn't see very well. At the bottom of that hill was a noisy little creek. There were no lights there. If you missed the stepping stones to the other side, you would either stand or sit in about 2 feet of cold, cold water. Once you got across the creek, you had left the grim little shack. You were safely on the other side. Then you entered the pine forest. These were those tall southern pines, the canopy way up there. And because of the needles, it caught the wind and kept the humming sound all the time. And then these little nocturnal creatures would torment me with the cracking of a limb or a romantic little call to a mate somewhere up there. It paid at that time to concentrate on objectives, and the number one objective was to get home. Oh, I see you're following me. The number one objective was to get home. Now, the bus ride was easy and normal and peaceful. No problem, just riding along. But that last mile, you wanted to think about safety and the joy of being at home, where you are securely locked in by a parent who saw to that as the last act every night. But the most important thing was home. And when you got there, and only then, your nerves would settle down. Now, I ought to tell you that there were dog packs in those forests. When you go back to my childhood, you're going back to the Great Depression. And there were people who genuinely loved dogs, but they couldn't afford to keep them. So they would drive them to the forest edge and simply turn them loose. And these dogs would get together, big ones and little ones, and they would run through the night and keep up a real racket. Now, I liked it when the noise told me they were far from where I was. And you could tell. I never really had any experience with them, but we had a neighbor by the name of Mr. Foster who spent a whole night in a tree because the dogs settled down beneath him. And so maybe you don't get it. But I will tell you, if you got into trouble in those forests, you could yell until you were blue in the face, but nobody was going to hear you. You could cry for help with all your might, but nobody would respond. That was the chance you were taking in the last mile home. There used to be a spiritual that they would sing, you got to walk that lonesome valley. You've got to walk it by yourself. Nobody else can walk it for you. You got to walk it by yourself. I hope I'm impressing you with the fact that the last mile home is going to be the hottest of the evening, the darkest of the evening, and perchance the most dangerous of all. But you got to keep concentrating on home. That's right. And keep moving in the right direction. There is a familiar and favorite text of mine. I used to write it on every letter I sent to my precious mother. God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. There shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. Amen. And those words for her were like fruit from the tree of life, and for me, they represented comfort and courage and hope. Amen. Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall also the days of the coming of the Son of Man be. That's what Jesus said. Well, how was it in the days of Noah? Genesis chapter 6, a succinct little sentence says that the world was full of violence. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now there. Amen. 2 Timothy chapter 3, this know also that in the last days, no equivocating, you don't miss that. Right. Unless you don't know what last means or days mean. In the last days, perilous times shall come. This is what the apostle said. We are nearing the end, and it will be dangerous just to be alive. That's right. That's right. I hear it on the news almost daily. People who hadn't planned to die, caught in crossfires of rival gangs. A little girl, 9 years old, shot in the head 2 weeks ago. It's dangerous just to sit on your steps and talk to your friends. It's dangerous to be in your bedroom when the bullets start to fly and people are struck within the sanctity of their own homes. As we near the end, we've got to face things that we have never seen before. That's right. We are living in a world where there is no privacy. We're living in a world where our freedoms are being threatened day by day.